Grace and peace to you from God our Father and from our Lord Jesus Christ, and welcome our brothers and sisters to this podcast, this edition of the Ministry Exchange with Dr. Mapson, a podcast that is designed to have authentic and real conversations concerning ministry yesterday, ministry today, and ministry tomorrow. Um, we are glad that you're able to join us and to engage in these conversations. And we try to bring to the podcast persons whom I know will be of a great value and blessing to us. And we are, having said that, we are delighted today to have in our midst the Reverend Dr. DeForest B. Soaries Jr. Dr. Soaries is retired pastor of the First Baptist Church of Lincoln Gardens in Somerset, New Jersey, where he serves faithfully over a period of 3 decades. He is also the founder of the Debt-Free Financial Freedom Movement, which is a groundbreaking initiative helping individuals and churches to break free from debt and to build lasting financial stability. Dr. Soaries served as New Jersey's Secretary of State from 1999 to 2002, becoming the first African American male to hold that office. He is also the president and CEO of Corporate Community Connections Incorporated, helping to guide corporations in corporate social responsibility and community impact, something that, of course, is in the headlines today. Dr. Soaries is the author of 12 books, including the bestsellers Say Yes to No Debt and Say Yes When Life Says No. He's been inducted into the Martin Luther King Jr. Board of Preachers at Morehouse College. And again, we're delighted to welcome him, who is not just a brother and a colleague, but a friend of many years. We have to go back uh, to some beginnings and in days in Newark when we favored each other to the point where people would come up to me and say, "Are you Buster Soaries?" Right. And I got tired of saying no. And so he just want to ask me, "Are you Jesse Matthews?" Right. Right. And never said no. And one of the great restaurants there, black owned, was Stewart's, right, on Lyons Avenue, where you'd go to Stewart's and you would see somebody or everybody at some point, at some point during the week. Um, and uh, and so over the years, we had developed a real deep friendship, and grateful to you for that friendship. I want to begin uh, with your beginning in terms of ministry. We are both sons of preachers and pastors. What was it like uh, in terms of coming up in the home of a pastor? Uh, Tell us a bit about your family, your father, um, and those beginnings.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. You've had all of the giants in the black church, and I'm just thrilled to be in that number.
Absolutely.
And this podcast outreach, I'm sure you're learning, is a unique platform for ministry.
Hmm.
It's not about becoming famous; it's about um, broadening your reach. And
Right.
I'm very proud of what you're doing, and so thrilled to see the responses. People are talking about this all over the country. Good. My grandfather was a Jamaican immigrant. And what's interesting about that statement is that we came up in the 60s. We watched Alex Haley's Roots. And
Yes.
so we have a strong sense of being the descendants of people who were enslaved.
Mhm.
And it really wasn't until later in life that I realized that my history and my heritage includes immigration. My
Mm.
grandfather came to New York through Ellis Island
Wow.
and moved to Brooklyn. And when I was Secretary of State, I actually went to Ellis Island, searched the archives, and found the card that he signed is upon entering the country. Is that so? As an immigrant. And he had 6 children. After his 6th child, he had a stroke and was bound to a wheelchair for the rest of his life. And so my grandmother basically raised her children as a single parent. And my father, of the 6 children, was the one who became a minister. My grandfather was a minister. He was Seventh-day Adventist.
Right, right.
And what's interesting about the Seventh-day Adventist movement was that in the 1930s, the largest Seventh-day Adventist church in the country was in Harlem.
Mm.
It was a black church led by a bishop named Bishop Humphrey. And Bishop Humphrey took the position that if blacks could not go to Seventh-day Adventist nursing homes, if blacks could not go to Seventh-day Adventist colleges, if blacks in the Seventh-day Adventist movement were treated the same way blacks were in the 18th century in the Methodist Church. He did what Richard Allen did
Mm.
in Harlem. He pulled out of the Seventh-day Adventist denomination and started a new organization in Harlem. And it was in that organization that my grandfather served and supported the movement to pull out. So there was a black Seventh Day movement separate from the Seventh Day Adventists, and that's where I grew up in Harlem.
I see.
Yeah.
Uh,
So before I was even born, just the seeds of resistance, the DNA of protest and independence were in me without me even knowing it. So my dad became a minister in the church that my grandfather founded in Harlem, right down the street from Abyssinian.
oh, I see.
And so as a child, I was 1 block away from Adam Clayton Powell Jr.
Mm.
Didn't realize it.
Right,
I knew the
right.
church was there. We had members of our church. For instance, our musicians played for Mother Zion AME church, and her husband played for a big Presbyterian church in Brooklyn. So I was really raised in the black church culture of Harlem and Brooklyn, New York. My dad was an educator, however. He was, like most pastors today, bivocational. So he served as a pastor, but his income, the way he fed the family, was by teaching and then later as a school administrator. So I grew up in a home of educators and clergy. We were in church, and as you know, the Seventh-day movement is quite strict and
Yeah.
legalistic. We didn't eat pork. We didn't go out on Friday night. We couldn't play baseball or games on Saturday, and it was very restrictive. And the older I got, the more I became frustrated with that structure. But more importantly, I became theologically curious about our doctrine because, again, you had Martin Luther King Jr., Wyatt Walker,
Yeah.
Ralph Abernathy, and others who were also Christians, but their Christianity translated into activism around social justice,
Right.
whereas our tradition was more legalistic around rules and regulations. And so when I became of age, I wanted to explore how other Christians were able to read the same Bible we did, but come to different conclusions in terms of lifestyle and activism and advocacy. And it was really Jesse Jackson who introduced me to the broader social gospel activist theology.
Hmm. Yeah. What was it like making that transition? Um, how did was your father still living then? I mean, when
Yeah.
you made the transition, so when you made that, that's a tough, a courageous move to not necessarily reject that, but to say I need more, and then to become what we call a missionary Baptist.
Sure. Well, I became an activist in high school. So I was living at home. My dad was pastor, and I was active in forming a black student union at Montclair High School in New Jersey. I was active in helping organize a voter registration drive to elect the first black woman who became a senator, Winona Lippman in New Jersey.
Yep.
So my dad saw my activism and really respected it. When I decided that I wanted to go into ministry, my dad literally sat me down and said to me, "Don't let our church pay for your education."
Mm.
And I asked him why. And he said, "Well, if if we pay for your education, you'll be obligated to us after you finish school.
Mhm.
And I think you're going to want more options than that." So my dad had a broader view of religion, even than his own church affiliation. You have to know that Sam Proctor was one of my dad's mentors
Mm.
in the educational realm, but he followed Dr. Proctor also in terms of his ministerial and theological perspective. My dad had gone to Bloomfield when it had a seminary. So he had been exposed to theological education. And I think had he lived beyond his 47th year, he died young. He was the victim of medical malpractice. I believe my dad would have also transitioned out of the Seventh Day Movement and joined, at the very least, Seventh Day Baptist, because he was very Baptistic in his preaching. One of his best friends was D.C. Rice,
Yeah,
was
in Montclair.
pastor of Union Baptist Church in Montclair, who I came to learn was also the pastor for Sam Proctor in Virginia.
Is that
D.C. Rice baptized Sam Proctor.
get out of here?
And D.C. Rice was one of our role models in Montclair for both
Yes,
leadership and preaching.
absolutely.
And then he was good friends with Bill Gray,
Gray.
who succeeded D.C. Rice
At,
Union
at
Baptist,
Union, yeah,
and Calvin Sampson, who was at St. Paul's Baptist Church in Montclair.
right.
So my dad had a rich network of clergy friends outside of his denomination. Even the Church of God in Christ, we were very close to Kelmo Porter,
Yeah,
who was Church of God in Christ before it became
that's
Baptist,
right. He was.
and then his successor, Norman Prescott. So I grew up around a lot of preachers, and of course, my grandmother was the mother of the church that Bishop F.D. Washington pastored in Montclair before he went to Brooklyn.
Before he went, he was in Montclair before he went to Brooklyn.
Yes, he was. He ate dinner at our house every Sunday.
Wow.
So I had this rich tapestry of exposure
Yeah.
theologically, and it, I believe, influenced my thoughts to be more inclusive than some of the more rigid, legalistic religious traditions of my church.
Yeah. Yeah. So you even before we didn't even get to S. Howard Woodson yet.
No, we haven't gotten there yet.
We haven't gotten there yet. But yeah, what I also learned was Harry Emerson Fosdick
Was in Montclair.
pastored in Montclair before Riverside.
First Baptist Church. I walked past that building every day on my way to high school, which was on Church Street and pastored by Harry Emerson Fosdick, who I later learned was one of the major influences on my mentor, Sam Proctor.
Yes.
When Proctor talks about his own theological perspective and his grounding based on his education and reading, he always cites Harry Emerson Fosdick and his book, How to Read the Bible,
Yeah.
as a major influence on who he became. So all of these exposures and influences converged and became a part of me in ways that I could not have orchestrated myself.
Yeah. And Fosdick being a liberal theologian, probably the most impactful and most popular clergy person of his time.
That's right. That's right.
Without
He was, I would call Fosdick the successor to Rausenbusch
yes,
in terms of theological impact
yeah,
and progressive / liberal theological interpretation.
right. What did he say? Preaching is truth through personality or something
Right.
something. Wow. Yeah. Okay. Then then to um we get to Shallow and Trenton.
Right. But before we go there, my my dad was so disciplined that even today, 50 years after his death, I can think about how my dad would approach either preaching or leadership or family, and take from his example and apply them to my life. For instance, my dad would go to the church on Friday night and preach his entire sermon to the empty building.
Is that so?
Yes, sir. When my dad died, he left a catalog of typed sermons. In fact, I was so unprepared to be a pastor because his death was so sudden, and the church shocked me by asking me to stand in. The first year or two of my pastorate, I was preaching his sermons. I was wearing his robe and preaching his sermons. But he was so disciplined and structured that, again, to this day, his influence on my life is something that's ongoing. When I was working for Operation Push, Jesse Jackson started Push in 71. I went to Push in 73. Dr. Woodson, who was the pastor of the Shiloh Baptist Church in Trenton, a very, very successful church.
Yeah.
He had been the president of the state NAACP, right, while being pastor. And then he was elected to the state legislature while being pastor. And in the 1970s was the first Black speaker of a state legislature, right, country.
Right.
And when he became speaker, I was working in Operation Push, and I called Harry Batts and Lawrence Roberts and a few other pastors,
Mm-hmm.
and we went to Trenton to pray with him in his speaker's office and to offer our support and to let him know that we had his back as preachers and as Black people. And that formed a friendship. His assistant, Jackie Holzendorf, became a liaison, and he would start inviting me to preach at Shiloh, often at the last minute. In fact, it was very interesting because one of my dad's friends was Arthur W. Jones,
Yeah.
Pilgrim Baptist in Newark,
And who was at Zion here?
who was at Zion. That's right,
Yeah.
in Philadelphia.
Philadelphia. Yeah.
And what Dr. Woodson would do, because he and Dr. Jones were best friends, he would call Jones, and Jones would call me, and Jones would say, "Woodson needs you." And often it would be on Saturday night because Woodson would have to travel or something else would happen. And they knew I was free on Sundays because I was preaching on Saturday, right? So I was a frequent guest at Shiloh Baptist in the 70s. When I first started, I could barely preach. And Woodson befriended me. I went to college with his son, Howard. And
Mm-hmm.
Howard and I never became great friends, but we were good friends. But Woodson, as it were, adopted me as another son. And I was as close to Woodson in many ways as his biological son.
Yeah.
So Woodson adopted me in the mid 70s. And so when I finally decided to go to seminary at Princeton, I went back to Shiloh to say to Dr. Woodson, it would be painful for me to have Princeton send me to a small white Presbyterian church to do my field education, my internship. So what I'd like is to do my internship at Shiloh, and that's how
That's
official institutional relationship started.
I see. I see. That's how it was. A Philadelphian.
Oh, Philadelphia.
He's a
to the bone.
Philadelphian, and was a member of Mount Zion on Woodland Avenue, and was a candidate for that church,
Was he?
and was rejected in favor of maybe Hiawatha Coleman or somebody. But just look at God closing that door. That never would have.
That's right.
Did he not go?
Who would have been in Shiloh who would he?
Right.
Right.
Absolutely.
And he loved and admired M.M. Peace.
Yes.
And of
He
course,
the family asked him to preside at M.M. Peace's funeral.
is that right?
Yeah, he presided.
And he was a Philadelphian to the core.
Yeah. Yeah. But then that's a continuation then of that social justice uh, um, protest that was already in you.
Right.
You didn't get it when you got to Shiloh. It was already there, and he it seemed like he just was the perfect mentor for you.
Well, he was, because he brought together the religious world, the civil rights world, and the government world.
Yeah.
But what I learned from Woodson more than anything, besides his preaching, because he was a great preacher.
Yes.
But the way he led Shiloh Baptist Church, leading a large Black Baptist church is an art unto itself.
Mm.
And you can't learn it anywhere except in a large Black Baptist church.
Right.
I've got 2 seminary degrees, and I didn't learn anything in either seminaries equivalent to what I learned from S. Howard Woodson at Shiloh Baptist Church.
Yeah.
When you sit in a board meeting with a pastor like Woodson, and you've got trustees and deacons around the table, there is something that happens to the person in charge that words can't describe.
Yeah.
And you have to learn it on sight. You have to be there. You can't read about it in a book. You have to understand how you handle the deacon who disrespects you in public.
Yeah.
You have to handle the trustee who wants to put you in your place.
Right.
You have to handle the group dynamics of people who would never confront you individually, but when they get in a group, they kind of gang up on you.
Mm.
And no one handled that better than S. Howard Woodson.
Yeah.
And so when I became Secretary of State, for instance, and people said, well, have you ever led a major department in state government? I said, no, but I've been a Black Baptist pastor. If you could do that,
You're qualified.
state government is a piece of cake.
You're qualified. You're qualified. Wow. And that's experience there positions you then from what you learned to accept your First Baptist. And
Yeah, I didn't want to go to First Baptist.
right.
They wanted you. They loved you. My predecessor loved you, and the church loved you. I did not want to go there, but First Baptist is in a small section of Franklin Township, Somerset, and Sam Proctor lived in Somerset.
That's right.
Sam Proctor moved to Somerset when Rutgers offered him a teaching job.
That's right.
And the whole time he pastored at Abyssinian in Harlem, he lived in Somerset.
Right.
So he commuted from New Jersey to New York to be close to Rutgers. 2 of the leaders of First Baptist were students at A&T when Proctor was president,
Mm.
a deacon and a trustee. And when C.H. Brown retired, those 2 went to Proctor to ask for a recommendation. And at that time, I was working on my doctor of ministry degree at United Theological Seminary
Mm-hmm.
as a Proctor Booth Fellow. And Sam Proctor recommended me. I didn't want to go there. And he said, if you don't go, I'm kicking you out of your doctoral program.
And he
he
could say that too.
That's right.
He just say whatever he wanted to say. And there's yes, Dr. Proctor.
So Proctor orchestrated that, and that's how I ended up at First Baptist Church in Somerset in November of 1990.
Yeah. Small church, and I've known First Baptist obviously years and years and years. Did, how do you navigate? Let me go back a second though, because your father is gone at an early age, and that vacuum is there, and I suppose that Woodson maybe and others kind of help fill that. But as a preacher's son, we share that. That aren't there moments when you wish your dad was alive to see what you've become
Every day.
and to
Every day. And my mother helped. My mother's still alive. She's 94. And my mother always comments that she wishes my dad had lived long enough to see what I've become.
yes.
And I think about it, especially since I still glean from him because of his strictness and his thoroughness and his discipline. But when my dad died, I was 24. And I did have relationships. I had Harry Batts
Mm-hmm.
at BeBe Baptist Church, who
Yes.
generously allowed me to use his office as the Operation Push headquarters for New Jersey in the 70s. I had Calvin Sampson, who had been a friend and who, in my mind, was the greatest preacher I'd ever heard
Yeah,
in my life.
Yep, he was.
And people in Montclair would go to funerals to hear him preach, even if they didn't know the deceased.
Yep.
But I really didn't have um, a father figure in my life. I had S. Howard Woodson, of course, who taught me about leadership and preaching and government. But when Sam Proctor came along,
Yeah.
which was about 12 years after my dad died, Sam Proctor was more than a professor. I was a student at Princeton. He came as a visiting professor, and I took his class, but I didn't realize how he felt about me until he literally invited me while I was a student at Princeton to give a lecture to his undergraduates at Rutgers. He had been following my civil rights career. And of course, you know that Jesse Jackson had been a student at A&T when Proctor was president. And so
Right.
Proctor and Jesse had a relationship. So Proctor knew who I was. Proctor taught my dad in the Rutgers Graduate School of Education. So for me to have a relationship with Proctor was beyond my wildest dreams. And he really took me in. He embraced me, and he became the father figure that really pulled all of those other relationships together. And the gap was finally closed from the time my father died, because I really didn't have one person who I admired and I trusted and who had taken that much interest in me. So Sam Proctor really became my surrogate dad until he died.
Yeah. 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 Let's talk about politics, and being Secretary of State, pastoring First Baptist, and what that was like, uh, and being Republican. And again, I think we need perspective, historical perspective, because we tend to look at the moment and not see the moments behind us. Um, Republican Party was the party of black people because of Lincoln, up probably until Roosevelt and his policies for black people, and then Kennedy, right? But a lot of our black leaders, including black preachers, including my father,
Right,
were Republican.
right. Arthur
Wh-
Jones was Republican.
Absolutely.
Ben Books.
Daddy King
Right,
was Republican. When the Republican Party was not the Republican Party of today, and when there were liberal voices in the Republican Party, the, the Civil Rights Bill would not have been passed without the support of liberal Republicans, because it was the Democrats and the Dixiecrats who
Right.
didn't want the bill.
right.
Right. So we got to kind of look at what the times were like, and the idea that as black people we need to be at both tables.
Right. When possible. I'm not sure it's
Yeah.
possible today
Right. It's
on a federal level.
right.
But I mean, to your point, in New Jersey, the first state that made it illegal for um, to do investments in South Africa because of apartheid was New Jersey.
It was New Jersey.
1984. In New Jersey, when we were trying to reform the state police, the party that advocated for reform the most was the Republican Party.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been a Democrat.
Yeah.
I've been a Republican. Now I'm an independent. And I think what you're expressing is my view, is that we have to be less emotional and more strategic when it comes to politics.
Yeah.
You know where my church is. My First Baptist is right on the border of two counties, Somerset County and Middlesex County,
Mm-hmm.
and divided by a state highway. So when I led the effort to build a new sanctuary, I had to get approval from people in Somerset who were all Republicans,
Yeah.
and people in Middlesex were all Democrats, and the state highway was controlled by Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time I got to First Baptist, I had to have good, strong relationships with Democrats and Republicans. Now, I pretty much stayed out of politics, and I distinguished between politics and government, because I didn't have to run to be Secretary of State. I was appointed by the governor.
Right.
But I was appointed by a governor whose candidacy I did not support when she ran for governor.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think she knew enough about black people, poor people, urban people, or young people. And so I supported her opponent. But after I supported her opponent, she came to First Baptist to say, listen, I don't know enough about black people, poor people, urban people, or young people, and I'd like your help. And I said, if there's ever a time when I disagree with you, if I have access, I'll disagree privately and not publicly. I won't embarrass you if I have access. And for 4 years, many of us, including Reggie Jackson, who led the Black Ministers Council, and others, we had access to a Republican governor in ways we had not had access previously to any governor.
Right.
And when she ran the second time, we actually endorsed her. Many of the black preachers in New Jersey endorsed Christy Todd Whitman for governor. And a year in, when the Secretary of State resigned, she asked me to be Secretary of State. And when I became Secretary of State, I had a lot to say about urban policy, access for black people to state government. And it was a great relationship. While she was governor, we thought that she would at least be considered for vice president when George W. Bush ran. And the far right wing religious leaders in the Republican Party basically told George Bush that if Christy Whitman is your vice president, we won't support you.
Hmm.
So the religious right really killed her candidacy, which was an eye opener because many of us see Republicans as just Republicans.
Mhm.
But there was as much division in the Republican Party. And those were the early days of the far right really holding the rest of the Republican Party hostage.
Right.
And it became very unfriendly for black people and certainly for a black person like myself. So it became no longer even strategically wise for me to identify as a Republican. And that's when I became independent. But I think as a people, we have to understand that neither party has had us as their priority.
Absolutely.
And like
Absolutely.
Jewish people, like the growing Hispanic population, like women and other special groups, we need to be negotiating on behalf of our communities and our people in light of where we are today. Bill Clay, who recently died, congressman from Missouri, wrote a book way back. And the name of the book was No Permanent Friends, No Permanent Enemies, Permanent Interests. And while many of us say that, we don't really practice that. And I think we have to be much more strategic as we think and act politically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Then in terms of the politics, pastoring a church, there's always pushback from some people about pastors' involvement, which for you was more government than politics, but
Right.
perceived, and jealousy, which you would not say, but I will say, because there were black leaders who um, objected to your prominence as being a Republican, even though you were doing more for the cause than they could do, and I guess that's always a part of it. But then in our churches, I mean, um, you you've taken First Baptist. Uh, a part of that for me when I look at First Baptist, what First Baptist used to be. I remember when First Baptist had about 10 choirs.
Right. Right.
At least there were more more choir members than church members.
That's right.
And and that just wasn't maybe there, but choir members in this choir would only come on their Sunday to sing, right?
Sing.
Certain people would only come to hear their choir sing, and every choir was its own little church,
That's right.
and
With his own office
the organist was the pastor
and his
of the.
own treasury.
Yes,
They had their own bank accounts.
absolutely, absolutely. My first church, there was more money in the clubs
That's right.
than we had in the central treasury, so we had to move to.
It took about 3 years for us to make that transition
Yeah,
because the biggest club was the usher board.
yes.
And so they had the most money. And the president of the usher board was married to the treasurer. So there was inherent conflict where we tried to convince all of the treasuries to come into the central treasury because the biggest treasury was married to the treasurer. and it took some time.
And no accountability.
No, not at all.
No accountability.
No, they would meet every year at the end of the year to vote on how much of their
How
money
much?
they will give to the church. So, yeah, we had all of those dynamics to deal with, and we had to do so patiently, lovingly, but
Yeah.
firmly, because um, you can't build a strong church when the ministries and clubs and auxiliaries function, as it were, as little mini churches. To your point, they all had constitutions. Every
Yeah.
club and the church had a constitution. The church had no constitution.
Yeah. Yeah. We used to find bank accounts of when people died.
Right.
My first church, people died, and the relatives would come and say, "Oh, we found this savings account."
That's right. In the church's name. But I'll tell you this, if you look at our history, it's both the challenge for the new pastor,
Yes,
but it's the legacy of the Black church.
it is.
Because it was those funds that were used to bury people that didn't have insurance.
Right.
Those funds were used to pay people's rent to avoid eviction.
Yeah.
Those funds were used to cover medical expenses for people who couldn't afford it. So the lack of accountability, when you really look at the history and do a deep dive into what happened, really made for a survival mechanism for Black people.
Yeah.
And there was a time in my life when I looked down on that and thought it was just sublime ignorance.
Yeah.
And people like H. Dean Trulier and other scholars really helped me understand the depth of the Black church as not just a place where people do silly things,
Yeah.
but a place where God has used what looks from the outside like chaos
Right.
to be an ark to protect us from the tidal waves of oppression and abuse.
Yeah. And the Black church was the only thing Black people had.
All we had.
I say the Mount Calvary Missionary Baptist Church in Newark, my dad's church, my home church, would not be the church it is, would not have built in 1957 were it not for the Alabama club, the Georgia club,
North Carolina
Virginia club, North Carolina club, South Carolina, who competed,
Yes, sir.
and raised money and sold chicken dinners, fish dinners to build that church. And
Right.
and the people used what means that they had. And then now to and see now where is God trying to take us now?
Right.
We're beyond that, and we start talking about tithing because I grew up. There was no talk about tithe.
Dues. All dues.
Dues.
Right.
Paying my dues.
That's right.
Yeah.
The the genius of God is that unlearned, unlettered clergy,
Yeah.
um, non-professional workers, people coming out of enslavement were able to piece together
Hmm.
based on a biblical message that had been distorted. An institution that literally helped the 4 million who came out of enslavement turn into the 30 some odd million we are now. And to the extent that we have any success, we have any sanity, we have any hope, it's based on what God did through the Black church.
Yeah.
No
Absolutely.
question about it.
No question about it. And that migration after World War II, after World War One, my parents included after World War II, by the thousands coming from the South, from the farms, coming to for better life with faith and hope and bringing the institutions with them.
Right.
And values
Right. Right.
is that's the foundation on which we serve. I mean, and those younger pastors who come after us, it's already there. And what are you going to do with it, and how will you navigate in terms of the contemporary church and times, uh, by not doing what Trump does, using a chainsaw and destroying, but building on that, and like you say, lovingly getting building relationships. We talk about that a lot on the podcast. Building relationships so that people will begin to trust when the installation takes place and they give you the keys. You know, you don't have the keys. Yeah,
That's right.
those are just keys.
Yeah, you become the pastor.
You become and you earn the keys because you earn the trust of people who are willing to say, I'm going to follow you and let you lead me and let you care for my soul.
And what you do as a corollary to that is to understand who these people are, to understand
Yeah.
that these people have had this as their world.
Yes.
One scholar called the Black church the surrogate world. And a lot of these things, the Flower Club, the Mississippi Club, if 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 you're not loving and caring and integral in the way you transition out of that old cultural tradition into a new paradigm of ministry, you're really destroying people's lives. It's
Yeah.
not just a matter of using pastoral authority to impose change.
Yeah.
It's a matter of helping people outgrow things that are somewhat anachronistic, but they have value
Yeah.
to folks.
That's all they know. This episode of the Ministry Exchange is brought to you by our partner, Terry Funeral Home Incorporated. For over 85 years, they've served families in the Philadelphia area with care, compassion, and consistency. Under the leadership of Gregory T. Burrell, Terry Funeral Home has become a trusted name, offering guidance and support when it's needed the most. So, whether you're facing the difficult task of planning ahead or navigating the grief of a recent loss, Terry Funeral Home provides the kind of support that eases the burden with dignity, clarity, and compassion when families need it the most. To find out how they can serve your family with care and confidence, visit terryfuneralhome.com. And thank you.
That's all they know.
That's all they know.
The woman, if you came to First Baptist just before I left, you would notice that probably everything in the church, the music ministry, the Sunday school, everything, including the facilities, was different, except the women's auxiliary.
Mm.
The women's auxiliary, when I left in 2021, was exactly what the women's auxiliary was when I got there in November 1990. Because to touch that would have been to do injury,
Mhm.
psychological, emotional, spiritual injury to the people who were there, and I left them alone.
Mhm.
I didn't bother them.
Yeah.
They didn't bother me. I left them alone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Let's this is rich. This is rich. Let's shift a little bit to um the music and your managing Fred Hammond, Marvin Sapp, the Winans, and others. Um, the the business and again, um, we we are in charge of the music and worship in the church, even though we may not be musicians.
Right.
Well, you're a musician.
I'm not.
Yeah, yeah, but I mean, even if I weren't,
Right.
it's I pastor that too, but I want to be equipped to do that through some knowledge of music and et cetera like that, and you have that, which is taking you into this avenue of the business side of some of our uh, impactful singers. What is that like, and how did that come about?
It's very interesting. When I did work for Reverend Jackson, one of the unique things about him was that his influence and his reach and his relationships extended into every sector of Black life. And as a follower for Dr. King, Harry Belafonte, Mahalia Jackson.
Yes.
Dr. King was well known for having attracted entertainers who not only marched with him, but raised money for him.
Absolutely.
And Reverend Jackson inherited a lot of those relationships and expanded. And so when I worked for Push, because I was the national director of Push, my final role was national coordinator of Push, I interacted with Roberta Flack, with the Jackson Five, and then later Michael Jackson, with Shaka Khan, people who just came around, and Isaac Hayes, Barry White, all of these people were around Push, and Reverend Jackson knew them, I knew them, and I saw from the inside some of the workings of the Black music industry, mostly R&B. And what I realized was that R&B was basically Black talent and white money. When CBS wanted to get into Black music, they basically hired a couple of Black executives who stole Motown artists, who stole Stax record artists, who stole Sussex Records artists. So in the 60s, we had these Black music labels. And by the 70s, the Black artists who were on those labels ended up being signed to white labels. And then when the white companies signed the Black artists, they fired the Black executives. So by the time we got into the 80s, there were very few Black executives left on these labels that used the Black executives to steal Michael Jackson and others to the white labels. When a friend of mine called me and said that he was managing Edwin Hawkins and he needed some help, I went out to California to meet with the Hawkins family because Edwin's younger brother, Walter, had made this gospel record that had just blown up. And they were singing Going Up Yonder, Unchanged, and Walter's wife, Tremaine, at that time they were like celebrities. They were packing out stadiums. And my friend, Dwight McKee from Chicago, who had also worked with Reverend Jackson as a younger guy, he said, listen, I need your strategic mind to help me help them. And so I became a kind of advisor to the Hawkins family, and Walter Hawkins pulled me aside one day and said, Soaries, my wife needs a solo career, and I'd like you to help her. And so I got with Tremaine. I became Tremaine's manager, and we signed a contract for Tremaine to do her solo album, and that was the album that had Holy One, and 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 Tremaine just blew up. Because I had Tremaine, I met BeBe CeCe Winans. And BeBe and CeCe actually opened for Tremaine one night here in Philadelphia. And one of your outstanding promoters left the theater without paying BeBe and CeCe. And
Which happened a lot
in Philadelphia.
in Newark.
And Newark.
A lot.
And so BeBe and CeCe were literally with their mom behind the theater with no place to go, no tickets, no hotel. So Tremaine and I picked them up and took them to a hotel, got rooms for them, and BeBe called back and said, look, we need a manager. So I ended up managing BeBe and CeCe Winans and signing their first contract for their album. And because they're from Detroit, Commission was in Detroit, and Commission knew that I was managing BeBe and CeCe, and their records were doing well. Their career was blossoming. And so Fred Hammond called and said, Commission needs a manager. And when I managed Commission, it was time for Fred to do a solo career. So that's how it kind of parlayed from one artist to another artist. And the point was this, that I had three objectives. Objective number one was to help these young gospel artists make a living singing gospel and not be ripped off by either record companies or by promoters. The second was to help them maintain some spiritual integrity while they were singing gospel, because as you know, there are religious leaders and artists and personalities whose offstage and off mic presence is somewhat contradictory to the message that they say. And then the third was to help them expand musically to ensure that more people would be exposed to their music through both production and marketing. So that's how I got involved in music. My goal was to help expand and upgrade gospel. Prior to that time, Andre Crouch had really been the only what we'll call crossover gospel artist, where more than just the black church heard it. And our music was so good, and so many of the R&B artists had come out of the church.
Absolutely.
My goal was for contemporary gospel, the style of gospel that Fred Hammond and Commission and others did, would become more mainstream. And so we in the 80s really launched what is now considered to be the contemporary gospel genre. And I'm very proud of the contribution we made to that.
Which means maintains the integrity of the church too,
Right.
and the message,
The message of
the
the
theology of the church too, because that can be lost, particularly by some of the producers you're talking about who may not want the name of Jesus
Right.
in a song, for profit reasons.
Right.
And
Well, I always tell the church leaders and even artists, we will not outworld the world.
right,
The church is not in competition with the world. We are an alternative to the world. Christianity is not in competition with the secular society. We're an alternative. And so if we do us well in terms of integrity, in terms of production, then God will do the rest. There are times, excuse me, there are times when people have thought they had to downplay the core of the gospel to be heard and accepted outside of the church, when the most successful have proven that you don't have to do that.
right, right. Yeah. Let's shift again, and talk about your work. The book that you have here called uh, "Say Yes to No Debt." Say yes to no debt. How how your I remember Soledad O'Brien.
Right. CNN,
What year was that? That was like
2010.
20. Wow. I remember that segment that really brought to the fore this vision of yours.
Right.
Kind of maybe began how.
Right.
And
Well, CNN, under Soledad O'Brien's leadership, had done a series called Black in America,
yes, yes.
and they had done 2 segments. And after the second segment, they really received a lot of feedback, I'll call it, from people who said, "How can you do anything on Black in America and you have not mentioned religion or the church?" And so they decided they needed to do a third edition of Black in America. And they went around the country soliciting names of churches that they could use to create this kind of montage, collective update on what the Black church is doing now. Their vision was to have footage from the civil rights movement, and then examples of churches that are doing things today to update the world on what the Black church was doing. So our church's name was on the list, and they were going around the country looking at churches, and they would visit on Sunday morning. And when they came to our church on one Sunday morning, they heard people stand up in the middle of service and testify they had paid off their mortgage, they had paid off their car notes, they had paid off their student loans. This was in the middle of the financial crisis, the global financial crisis. And they were shocked. The producers were shocked. So they called Soledad and said, "You got to go to this church." So Soledad came to church, and she heard people testifying that they've written their wills. And because what we would do on Sunday morning, we would stop the service and ask for testimonies for people who were going through our program. And people were testifying about all of the great financial victories they were having in the middle of this meltdown where every place else people losing their cars, losing their houses, and losing their minds, literally. So Soledad took my wife and myself out to lunch, and she said, we had planned to do this documentary on quote unquote the black church and have 4 or 5 churches. Uh, how would you feel if we just did it on you? And I was scared to death because when a majority media outlets decides to do an hour-long feature on a black church, it's scandal. They're looking for scandal. It's not sexy enough. And so I said, I'll get back to you. And I literally went back to my leadership and said, CNN wants to do an hour-long piece on us. And I'm nervous about that. And we prayed about it. So I went back and said, okay, here are the parameters. And if you're willing to abide by these parameters, then we'll do it. And so they said, well, we want to follow 3 families and help us identify the 3 families, one young person, one married couple, and someone who's having a problem with employment, and have them talk about how you help them and what the church is doing for them. So that's how it came to be. And that was the year, I think you'll recall, there were some coal miners stuck underground for about a month, and they when they came out, it was world news. That was the number 1 viewership on CNN that year. We were number 2. Almost 15 million people saw this special. And like you just recalled, there are people call us today and said, I saw you on TV. We'd like to bring that here. That was 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So the power of media.
Yeah.
And after the CNN special aired in 2010, focusing on this ministry we'd been doing since 2005. We launched dfree in 2005. And we were just doing it to help our church members and the community.
Right.
In 2010, it blew up, and she said, you better get ready because we're putting you out there. So I took off the month of August that year and wrote the book, the first book. And she was right. By the next year, people were calling from everywhere. I mean, all over the country, denominations, Delta Sigma Theta sorority, just everywhere. So I wrote the book, then we followed up with a workbook, then we did a website. We just kept building and building and building to the point where today we can help any church and any church member, any company, any employee really take control of their finances and do it in a way that changes their lives and not just their money.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's powerful. That's powerful.
But you can't plan things like these. See, you can't sit down.
You didn't sit and say, "Oh, I'm going to do this," and it's good.
You can't do it. I didn't call CNN and say, listen, I'm doing something great. You should cover me. I was just doing what I believe God told me to do. And that was this. Listen, you can quote the Bible all you want. You can teach tithing all you want. But as long as our members are paying last month's bills with next week's check, as long as we're using credit cards as though it's income, as long as we're paying late fees and living without budgets, we are not going to convince people that tithing is possible.
Right.
You can pray about it, you can preach about it, you can teach about it, but tithing assumes that you have a strategy for your finances because tithing is a strategy. It's based on math. And if you don't deal with the other 90%, then talking about the 10%, it just goes over people's heads or bounces off of their off of their minds.
Yeah.
So that's what I learned. I grew up in a church that quoted the 10 Commandments every week, and the minister quoted Malachi 3:10
Yeah.
before every offering. But the reality is tithing is personal, it's private, and you don't even know, even if people say they're tithing, if they're tithing.
Absolutely.
You're not looking at their W-2s, their tax returns, right?
Some people think you're tithing because you bring money and put it in the tithe box.
That's right, because that's what ends up.
So whatever the amount is, if you put it in there, you tithe.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
But then the whole economic impact, even on the church and the resources that the church has. So, because I want to talk about pastors in terms of finance and churches and why is it that there's such a hesitancy to talk about. One reason is because we know we're always accused of talking about. We can say
Right.
we can say one sentence about money, and what we're accused of. That's all.
That's all we
That's
talk.
all we talk about is money, right? And the other part of that is then the preacher's getting all the money, which
That's right.
which is a lie as well, right?
So we're very intimidated, I think, by the criticism
Yeah,
and the media. Uh, the TV preachers have done us a disservice
yeah,
because they distort the reality of the fact that the median income for clergy today is $37,000.
mm, mm,
Bus drivers make more than $37,000. You can make more than $37,000 working at a fast food chain.
absolutely.
The majority of the clergy in this country have a job outside of the church, but the image of preachers with jets and preachers with mega churches and the like dominates the cultural mindset for clergy. And so it's hard for clergy to talk about finance because they don't want to be lumped into that category.
Mhm.
It was hard for me. That's really where this book and this ministry came from, because what I what I was concerned about was a lot of these TV preachers were getting money from my members.
Yeah,
They had to be.
absolutely.
They didn't have enough members to pay for satellites and jets. They were getting money from my members and your members.
Absolutely.
And I needed an alternative to what is commonly called the prosperity gospel
Yes.
that does have as its goal prosperity, but the methods and the rationale and the results of prosperity are different. And really, I prayed hard about this because I was I was so upset with certain TV networks that featured these preachers that made Reverend Ike look mild.
Yeah.
We were coming up.
Yeah.
If somebody called us Reverend Ike, it was an insult.
Yes. Absolutely.
It was not a compliment. But
Absolutely.
today, we've got preachers that make Reverend Ike look like Dr. King. I mean, they make Reverend Ike look very mild.
Yeah.
And what I didn't want to do, which I'm very disturbed about today, is that build a ministry on attacking other ministers.
Right.
And I see too much of that today. I see too much of of ministers attacking other ministers either on doctrine or
Yeah.
on something else.
On social media too. I mean, so it's
And
like
social media is blown up.
Yeah.
I mean, the way you get a following is by criticizing
Yeah.
other ministers. And I think there's enough work for all of us to do.
Yeah.
There's enough crime, there's enough sin, there's enough hatred to focus on that.
Yeah. And we don't need to talk about all preachers who in fraternities are going to hell. Sir. I thought I'd throw that.
I don't think we need that. No.
Yeah.
So I prayed hard and I really pulled, Doc, I really pulled on my community organizing background, my social gospel background, my personal responsibility commitment, my commitment to building strong Christians in relationship to God through Christ, put all of that together into a financial strategy, because finances are deeply spiritual.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. The Bible says that God will supply all of our needs, right? But if we never distinguish between our needs and our wants,
Mm.
we might be angry at God
Right. Right.
for not supplying our needs when in fact what we thought were needs were really wants.
Right. I want an Olympic-sized swimming pool.
Yeah, I thought I needed a Cadillac when I became a preacher.
Yeah.
Arthur W. Jones drove a Cadillac. Woodson drove a Cadillac. B.M. Johnson, I love B.M. Johnson. He drove a Cadillac. So I thought I needed a Cadillac. When all I needed was a car.
Yeah.
So a lot of my challenge when I started out, which I talk about in my book, is paying for what I wanted, often through debt, and not being able to afford what I needed. So what we have to do, I think, before we look at public policy, which is important, before we consider DEI programs in the private sector, all of that's important. But it's not a substitute for living within our means, paying our bills on time,
Mm.
not using credit excessively,
Mm-hmm.
and saving money for a rainy day, investing so that we can earn dividends, having money to retire.
Right.
And
Right.
what I do in this book that I had not done much of before is really pursuing strategies to increase our income. I mean, the fact is, I leaned so heavily into debt and reducing debt in the past that people think that's all we do. But the reality is, you can have a budget, you can stop using credit cards, but it takes money to live. And the economy's shifting. AI is replacing people's jobs. Small businesses are coming up for sale now at a higher rate than ever before. And what I talk about now, as much as I talk about debt, is where the economy is going, what sectors we can shift into, where should we be looking for the future in terms of employment. We'll always need plumbers. I don't care how much AI you have. I don't care how sophisticated the world gets. When you need a plumber, you need a plumber.
Right.
And I think we've got to start really emphasizing opportunities, especially for younger people coming along, because it does take money. But when you get the money, you have to have a strategic use of money that makes money work for you and you're not working for money forever.
Right.
And it's deeply spiritual. Our work is based on scriptures. The proverb says that a good person leaves an inheritance to his children's children.
Mm.
That means that when you die, you have more than bills to leave your family.
Yeah.
Says that the borrower is slave to the lender.
Yeah.
Jesus said in Luke 15 that the prodigal son was prodigal not because of immorality, but because of impatience, imprudence. He spent everything, didn't save anything. So the Bible gives us instructions, not just goals, but the Bible gives us instructions that can produce great financial outcomes. And that's what this book is about, and that's what our ministry is about.
You call it wasteful extravagance.
That's what that's the definition
Yes.
of
Of
being prodigal.
being prodigal.
Wasteful extravagance.
That's right. Not that he drank too much or that
Yeah, I always listen. I came up in church. I thought prodigal meant chasing women, drinking liquor, and stealing money. But
Right.
prodigal means wasteful extravagance. It means that I've got more shoes than I'll ever wear.
Yeah.
I've got more neckties. I was addicted to neckties.
Yeah.
I thank God for this new culture where we don't have to wear a tie everywhere. I was buying neckties. I was so addicted to
I
neckties
know what you mean.
that, and I was so known for that. When Charles Booth came to preach a revival at my church, he demanded that I take him to my necktie store because he wanted to buy neckties from the place I bought neckties.
Yep.
Yeah. So, but I'm paying $130 for neckties while I'm in seminary. Now, what kind of sense is that?
Right. Right. Yeah. There was a time, of course, when our people didn't have benefits, so the pastors didn't have them.
Right.
Generation like my dad, they didn't have retirement plans that the church paid into and health benefits and all of that. That's changed now with people having them. How do we help our churches understand? Because here again, how much does the pastor say in his or her own defense of what is needed, which is the same thing other people need in order to live, but the hesitancy and churches not understanding the need. There was a time when we lived in parsonages, right, and horror stories about church-owned property and all of that. Uh, the new model, of course, is housing allowance. You give me a housing allowance, I live where I want to live, kind of house I want to live in, and I have my own investment, right? How do we help churches in terms of the stewardship of the pastor, um, and then what do we say to pastors about their own finances? My dad used to say, and I think he heard it from somewhere, one day an old man is going to live in your house, meaning you.
That's right.
That's right. And so preparing for retirement financially, but then we might want to say a word about in how you did it in terms of of retiring and walking away from and allowing the church to move on
Right.
without you. But that's two things.
Well, you said a couple of things embedded in the question. First of all, pastors and churches need two objective realities when discussing compensation. Reality number one is the cost of living in that area.
Mm-hmm.
That's number one, because there are objective numbers. You know how much it costs to rent an apartment or to buy a house in Chicago. And if you don't start with the cost of living, then the pastor will be frustrated because the church is not paying enough. And the church, in many instances, will think they're paying too much.
Yeah.
So I've created a tool, and I use this tool. I don't do a lot of this, but when I do it, I start with, what does it cost to live in your area? If it costs uh, um, to rent an apartment, $1,500 a month to rent an apartment,
Mm-hmm.
that's the cost. And you know you should only be spending 25 to 33% of your income on housing.
Mm-hmm.
And that means to afford to live in that city, just from a housing perspective, you need to be making $60,000 to $75,000 a year to afford that apartment. If you got a wife and two kids, now that's objective fact number one.
Yeah.
Objective fact number two is that a church cannot afford to pay an unlimited amount of its income to the pastor.
Mm-hmm.
So if a church is bringing in um, $300,000 a year, right,
Right.
and it costs $1,500 a month to live there, then the church can't give all $300,000 to the pastor.
Mm-hmm.
From an IRS perspective, the IRS will close a church down if they, or any nonprofit, if a percentage of its income goes to the pastor in excess of what's reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the word that the IRS uses, is reasonable. And so you have to start there.
Right.
Because if you start there, you have objective facts that take away the emotions, take away the personality, and a third party even could come in and say, look, this is the maximum this church, given this income, can afford to pay this pastor. And then to the pastor, here's how much money you need to live comfortably with your family in this community, and here's what the gap is.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how do you close the gap?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the second thing. There are things pastors can do besides preach Sunday afternoon programs to close the gap. There's chaplaincies, there's teaching at community colleges. I have a list of 50 things they don't teach you in seminary,
Yeah.
that your seminary degree qualifies you to do to help close that gap. Because if you don't close the gap properly, you'll be at odds with your board, with your church and your board all the time.
Right.
You might be tempted to put your hand in the till, or you might demand that the church pay you more than the church can afford.
Yeah.
So that's number one. Then the second thing we have to do is talk about, how do you grow the church's revenue?
Right.
And there's only three ways to do it. The people who are giving, give more. The people who are not giving, give something.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have new givers. And so you need a strategy for each. You need a strategy for the people who are giving to give more, because often we have people who could give more, but they're still giving dues.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then we have a lot of high praisers in the church that don't give anything
Yeah.
at all. Even when you walk around and put money in the bucket, they'll either give nothing or they'll ball up a $1 bill so tightly you need a crane
Can't
to
tell.
pull it apart.
Yeah.
And then ways to reach more people. So that's another answer.
Yeah.
The other answer is that pastors have to be honest about what they need. Pastors have to have budgets just like everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Pastors need retirement plans. There's a retirement plan. I think you're in it, where when you retire, you can withdraw money as a housing allowance, so it's not taxed.
Right.
And that's the best retirement plan a pastor can have. That's my retirement plan.
Yeah.
So when I withdraw money from my retirement plan, I don't pay taxes on it. And there's only one company that I know of that does that, and it started out as a Baptist company. So it's the conversation, it's asking for help, it's having objective facts to compare your reality to, and understanding what the real gap is and how to close it.
Yeah. That's good. And I think also it's how do we get to a point where a pastor doesn't have to fight for $2 more a week in every church meeting.
Right.
You know, if there's a built-in mechanism, uh, obviously the church is doing
Yeah.
it, so it's not doesn't cheapen him.
What I did at First Baptist Maps, and I eliminated the pastor's anniversary gift and converted it into a bonus. So at the end of the year, there was a formula that the trustees used to objectively determine what my bonus would be. And it was based on church growth. It was based on leadership ability. It was based on income growth. There were a number of factors, just like in the private sector.
Yeah.
And so it took away this issue of people sitting in the back room voting on how much money they were going to give me or not give me.
Right.
And if the church members gave me a certain amount of money, the church treasury also gave me money.
Right.
We had no more discussions like that.
Spent an hour,
At least an hour.
debating over a $2 raise. Yeah.
And then I had a compensation committee at First Baptist, and that committee was authorized to negotiate and set my compensation every year. It was not a church-wide compensation.
Right.
It was not a trustee-wide compensation or deacon-wide compensation. It was a committee, 2 deacons, 2 trustees, 2 church members at large, and someone representing my interests. And I met with them once a year, and we had conversations based on the objective facts.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. One of our friends, the late Gerald Thomas, used to say that every seminary ought to have a class for prospective pastors in business and finance.
Absolutely. And many are. Many are starting.
Many are starting
Not enough.
in business and finance.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's in closing. This has been a rich conversation with you, my brother. You retired. Wow, I didn't realize it had been that long.
4 years.
4 years.
Yes, sir.
Wow, you look good.
I feel fine. I feel fine.
Yeah, you say, "Come on in, the waters
Yes,
waters
sir.
are fine."
Come on in.
To in terms of all that you've done at First Baptist, that those of us who know you know the church can visibly see, and then even internally, I preached for you on several occasions, a wonderful experience. Then you decide to retire at the right time for you, and walk away. You're not going there. Not that you could anyway, because you're all over the world, but you're not going back and sitting up
No,
in the
sir.
front row every Sunday. You're not in, going back for funerals. And I mean, talk about how you reached that decision, and mentally and emotionally were able to say, I've served my time, and I'm done, and let the church move on with another leader, and I'm out.
I read a book once called sorry. I read a book once called 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of the habits
Oh yeah,
begin with the end in mind. And so I began my pastorate at First Baptist with a vision for what the end looked like
Mm-hmm.
in terms of age, in terms of health, and in terms of ministry outcomes. We wanted to build a new sanctuary. I committed to doing that. We did that. I wanted to build institutions in the community. We wanted to do housing. We did that. We wanted to do economic development. We did that. We wanted to do foster care and adoption. We did that. And so I did my assignment. I did
Yeah.
what I believe God sent me there to do, and I knew what that looked like in advance.
Mhm.
So it's like driving a car. You're driving from here, and New York is your destination. When you get to New York, you're in New York.
You're in New York.
So I had reached my destination,
Yeah.
and only the pandemic extended my stay.
I remember that. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but I had reached my destination, and I extended it because of COVID, and I had other things to do. I wanted to serve on corporate boards. I wanted to write more books. I wanted to go spend more time in Africa
But you had something else to do.
because I planned it. I set it
Absolutely.
up. I
That's
worked along the way.
absolutely.
Yeah, I didn't wait until I retired to look around and say, "Okay, what's next?"
Right.
I started working on my what's next at least 15 years before I retired.
I see.
And I gave the church 5 years notice. Well, I gave the leadership 5 years notice. I gave the membership 3 years notice that I was going to retire. And I invited all of the ministry leaders with gray hair in the church to retire also. So by the time my successor came in, he had a new chair for the deacon ministry, a new chair for the trustee ministry, new leaders to work with, because you didn't want people who should have retired holding on to their positions,
Right.
and the new pastor come in wanting to implement new ideas and new programs and new vision. So I I I I prepared for retirement financially. I prepared for it emotionally. I prepared for it physically. I bought a house in Florida, b- uh, so to have a place to live outside of New Jersey. You
Right.
wouldn't have to hang around the church and call church members for help. Retirement is a process that culminates in an event, but it starts long before retirement
Yeah.
occurs.
Yeah. 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 Thank you so much. Um, we have been in conversation with Dr. Soaries for these few moments that have been very rich, and thank you, uh, my friend. You preached at Monumental also
Yes, sir.
several occasions. Last time it was for our 198th church anniversary. It was next year's 200 for
I
us.
went back a few hundred to do
And
something.
you preached. We were at a point of trying to renovate our parking lot. I never will forget it. You preached. Was it Deuteronomy? Consecrate yourselves for tomorrow.
Right.
Yeah,
Joshua.
and that sermon ignited me and us um, to complete that task, and even kind of set us up for the 2 years leading to the 200th. Consecrate yourselves for tomorrow, because the the anniversary can't just be about yesterday,
Right.
and should not be. It's got to be about tomorrow,
Right.
and what will Monumental look like 200 years from now, if 100 years from now, 10 years from now, and so I've always appreciated preaching that helps us to be better people, and you've done that. So thank you so much for uh, and again, I want us to know about this book, Say Yes to No Debt, and you're able to go on the website and purchase this book. It will be transforming for you in your lives, and thank you for the season that God has led you into, with all that you're doing beyond which is still an extension of being pastoral in your continuing season. Um, and so thank you very much. And thank you for being a part of this episode, brothers and sisters. And if today's episode has been of value, we ask that you would subscribe to the Ministry Exchange so that you won't miss any episode. Thank you for being with us. Until next time, God be with you.